privilege is invisible to those who have it. That's absolutely true. And one of the things where we're going to talk about biases is often, and you've heard me talk about this on this channel several times, is you have a beautiful woman and she has this belief that every man that she sees, that she deserves this top 10% of men. And the reason why is because the top 10% of men and all men are giving her so much attention. And so she has this bias against like less and less attractive men. A lot of people who are conservative, or a lot of people who see it from a men's point of view, think that Title IX was this nefarious action perpetrated by this like consortium of feminists and liberals specifically to disenfranchise men. And then the same situation here when we're talking about a pay wage gap. You have conservatives being like, well, this is just made up propaganda in order for women to, play the victim. This is something I really wish a lot of guys would do. You go look at some of these programs like whatever podcast, Access Vegas, Fresh and Fit, etc. And then you see these guys in the comments and they're like, these women are all, they're all 304, low quality women, blah, 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 whatever these words are. And what I would really love for these guys to do, and of course they're never going to do this, is take a second internally and ask yourself, did a woman hurt me? Is that why I'm saying this? That I'm saying, literally, you don't know these girls. You're calling them names and you don't know who they are. What's going on, guys? Michael Sartain here, and I am on the steps at the library here at Harvard Yard. You guys see the flags up there, Veritas, it means truth. You might be wondering why there's so many people out here, and that is because yesterday was the 374th commencement here at Harvard, several thousand people graduating. And you guys might have noticed on the news, this has been one of the epicenters of the news cycle recently because Harvard has recently lost over $2 billion in federal funding, as well as their ability to enroll foreign students because of findings by the Trump administration. I'm not actually here to talk about that, although that's going to be an interesting topic I'm probably going to go over with Tristan in a different video. I'm here to talk about biases. I'm here to talk about how all of us have different biases. I think this place is a credit to the United States. I think this institution has had so many unbelievable minds, thought leaders, incredible ideas, entrepreneurs, business people that have come through here. It's an absolute credit. And at the same time, this place is woke as bro. It is woke as, we were watching the graduation yesterday, and when they announced all the graduates from the divinity school, every single one of them was wearing rainbow colors. Every single one of them was in some sort of LBGT flag. And then I looked up the curriculum for the divinity school, and one of the courses is called Queering the Congregation. So listen, again, I'm not here to talk specifically about what your beliefs are, but I am here to talk about what your biases might be and how not open to your own biases you might be. So right here behind me, this is one of the really cool things I got to see, is this is where the commencement actually happened. And President Garber was right there at the top saying some not so nice things about President Trump. But one of the cool things I got to see was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar received his doctorate in laws. He was sitting right there. It was pretty cool to see Kareem in person for the first time. He quit playing. He was done playing, when I was, how old was I? I was 12 years old. So an amazing, amazing thing. So the thing is, while I do not, I'm a little bit center right, and I don't necessarily agree with everything that this place stands for, I do understand what a credit it is to our nation to have thought leaders and to have a knowledge base like this. I think is really, really amazing. And just in general, this is the same in every university. It's just as you lean more into academics, you lean less away from actual practice. So this is, first thing I want to go over is, why does it seem like so many people in academics, and it's not just here in the United States, it's all over the world, why is it that so many people in academics and why is it that so many people in the media seem to be so politically liberal? And I think the reason why that is, why that bias exists, is because in the media and in academics, you are one step removed from actual work, actual business. Not to say that that's not a work, that's a type of work, but someone who's a business owner understands the implications of a tax raise more so than someone who works in the media or works in academics. For instance, if you have a mandatory increase in minimum wage, for instance, this is something a business owner is going to understand in practice more so than, say, an academic economist would understand in theory, especially if he has tenure and he's not worried about losing his job. So this is one of the reasons why I've seen so many people, and by the way, not to say that conservatives aren't detached from reality too, generally, and I do agree with this statement, even though it's usually liberals who say this, privilege is invisible to those who have it. That's absolutely true. And One of the things where we're going to talk about biases is often, and you've heard me talk about this on this channel several times, is you have a beautiful woman and she has this belief that every man that she sees, that she deserves this top 10% of men. And the reason why is because the top 10% of men and all men are giving her so much attention. And so she has this bias against like less and less attractive men. There's some new studies that I've come across that are pretty amazing. One study goes over what happens when humans see unattractive people, and when they see unattractive people, they dehumanize them. That's the word that they use in the study. But this phenomenon is actually more prevalent in women than it is in men, meaning women have a tendency to dehumanize people that they see as unattractive more so than men do. And also it has to do with female disgust. If you've ever read any papers on evolutionary psychology, it talks about how when there's an aversion to like bad smells, snakes, spiders, things like that, women have more of an aversion to that, more of a disgust from that than men do. So what happens is the other day I was having dinner with this really beautiful, she's a crypto influencer, she's a really beautiful model. We're having dinner and I was explaining to her, I was like, women don't even see 80% of men, like literally don't even see them, don't recognize them. And it's not that they think they're ugly, they just don't even notice them at all. And then she goes, no, I'm not like that. I was like, really interesting. Can you describe our busboy? And she goes, we have a busboy? Yeah, so she didn't even see him. And it was really, again, this is one of those things where it's like privilege is invisible to those who have it. And the biases that we have sometimes are invisible to us. She is very much a very attractive woman who people that she did not find attractive, she didn't even notice them. It wasn't a function of disgust, she just didn't even notice they existed. So a lot of times we do that as well as humans. So let's talk about some of these other ones that we have. So we can talk about women having this bias, believing that, you know, one of the biggest problems, as Homath says, they get stuck on their highest setting. So women will end up dating a guy who's a 10 and think that she can get a 9 to commit, and is very fully unaware of the fact that she can't get one of these higher status men to commit. And often women will have this bias where they believe that if they do things that are masculine, like make more money, that somehow that this is going to have the same effect that it has for men. So for men, if you make more money, does that make you more attractive to the opposite sex? In general, yes, it does. For women, if you make more money, does that make you more attractive to the opposite sex? Well, it doesn't make you less attractive, but in general, not nearly to the same extent. And in fact, in some cases, if you making more money has to do with you working several hours, meaning like 60, 70 hours a week, that can actually make you less attractive to the opposite sex. So the problem is what we want to see is the same thing for men and women, but we don't. There's a biological double standard when it comes to stuff like that. What's another bias you might have? So for me, I'm aware of my biases. We did a video like this when I went to my high school. I'm aware of my biases being a heterosexual Christian man who grew up in Texas and played high school football and joined the US military. I understand that some people go through certain things that I didn't have to go through. Like certain people have to go through some difficulties because of their skin color or sexual orientation or whatever, and I didn't have to go through those difficulties. And sometimes just because I didn't go through them doesn't mean I shouldn't be aware of the fact that it's difficult. I can't tell you, I remember growing up in high school and meeting, there were guys in there who were openly gay, and it was just like, can you imagine being in North Texas in the 1980s, being openly gay? Like, it was very difficult. It's a much harder thing to do. So you have to understand other people's biases and where they come from. So what happens is, and then you also see the same situation where, this is one of the biggest ones that I've seen recently, is where people, based on their political beliefs, are supporting one country over another in a war that has nothing to do with the United States. So for instance, Ukraine and Russia. Most of you have not visited Ukraine or Russia, but I will almost be willing to bet you a very great amount of money that your belief on the Russia-Ukraine affair is almost entirely dictated by whether or not you're a Republican or a Democrat. Republicans are almost entirely in support of Russia, and Democrats are almost entirely in support of Ukraine, and it's one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. I don't know why we're in support of either one of them. It is one of the, I don't know how we ended up putting our in this mess in the first place and started acting like this is any of our business, and then we're actually getting into political debates about something that's going on so far away. Why is this happening? It's because of biases that we have. We see what our in-group, our friends do, so your Republicans, other Republicans, other Democrats, and then we just sort of follow along instead of coming to these realizations on our own. So ask yourself, what biases do you have based on your religion? If you grew up Christian or Muslim, if you grew up Jewish, the chances of you converting or staying in that religion is, I believe, something like 86%. So you may believe that you understand the way and the truth and the life better than anyone else, but are you aware of the biases that you might have because of your upbringing? Are you aware of the biases that you may have because your family grew up conservative, your family grew up liberal? And then the other best way to notice what these biases are is to have empathy for other people. This is a really big one. This is something Richard Reeves went on Chris Williamson, and he made this statement, and it really, I believe this, but I'd never heard anybody say it, articulate it the way that Richard Reeves did. He says, I believe everyone comes from good intentions. And it's true. It's like you have to initially, otherwise you become cynical. Like people who do things that I disagree with, like I have to understand that at some point, somewhere down the line, there was somebody who had some good intentions. I'll give you an example. I still, to this day, cannot understand any reasoning whatsoever for there not being voter ID. It's something that Democrats support, no voter ID, and it's something that Republicans oppose. And as much as I've tried, and I've really tried to have empathy for the other side, I'm trying to understand how in the world somebody can say, well, in the country that you live in order to protect your free and fair elections, we're not going to identify the people who are actually voting. It's so nonsensical. So the question that I usually ask them is the United States the only country in the world that has free and fair elections? And of course the answer they'll say is yes. They'll bring up maybe some European country, some Scandinavian country, whatever. Maybe some Asian country, Central American country, whatever. And then my question to them is, do they have voter ID? You'll find that almost every European nation has voter ID. So somehow you can have voter ID and still have free and fair elections. This is one of the most nonsensical things. So then I try to look for what my bias is. Do I have a bias here? Well, I happen to be slightly right of center, so maybe my bias is to just believe in things that the people right of center believe. And what I found is that the more information I look up, it tends to be a situation where there probably were some good intentions by people on the other side to say, hey, there's some disenfranchised elderly people, poor people, and minorities that are not going to have identification. And I think that may have actually been a problem 30 or 40 years ago. Now it's not a problem. Now this is an outdated idea. And then, you hear Chuck Schumer saying something to the effect of, we want a lot of these illegal immigrants to be able to vote. I don't know if you guys know this, but in municipal elections, immigrants can vote now. We're not citizens. And so while I do understand where my bias would lead me, in this case, I do think it led me into the right and correct position. I also understand that I need to have empathy for the other side, that they probably were legitimately some people who were trying to make sure that everybody was represented in an election. But at the same time, I can look at that bias and say, okay, you know what? Maybe it's time to look at that whole thing again. Whenever I have friends that are Democrats and I sit across from them and I'm like, go ahead and defend no voter ID for me. None of them can do it. I've never had a single one be able to do it. Maybe this is something I could debate with, Destiny or PWF or something like that. But I've never had a single one. Actually, no, I talked to PWF about this and he said, I don't want to die on this hill. So it's one of these situations where I had an idea of what I thought was right, and then I looked at my biases and I tried to have empathy for the other side to try to understand what they're going through. So let's do another one. Let's discuss the concept and the repercussions of, let's say, what happened in Title IX back in 1972, I believe. So Title IX, what it did was it allowed for more equitable measures, especially when it came to academics between men and women. And in 1972, there were 14 percentage points more men graduating with bachelor's degrees than women. In 2019, it was 15 percentage points in the opposite direction, meaning for every 100 women that were graduating, only 85 men were graduating. And right now, it's about 60% of college enrollees are female. So was this intended? If you ask some people, especially in the manosphere red pill space, they believe that this is just some like huge orchestrated, nefarious, feminist plot in order to destroy men or to displace men. And what it was more so is what I believe was an intent to make things more equal by uplifting the place of women in academia, which is a great and noble cause. But I think what happened is the repercussions were not examined. And then when the repercussions happened, one of the biases that people have, a lot of biases, especially people on the left, is the idea that men could be left behind. Because women and minorities are a protected class and men are considered a privileged class, the idea of men suffering wasn't real to them. It was a function where their biases would not allow them to accept the idea of men having to suffer. In fact, if you went to one of these Ivy League schools, and let's just say you studied sociology or you studied evolutionary psychology, and you came up with all this data on why men take their lives more often, and you wanted, or why men are more likely to be more likely to be homeless or victims of violent crimes, and you were to put that together in a course, and the course was called Why Men Suffer, no Ivy League university would allow you to produce that course, to teach that course. So why is that? Again, when it goes back to the biases. And if you guys want a very clear explanation on this, you should read Richard Reeves' book. It's called Of Boys and Men. It is the best explanation I've ever heard. And Richard Reeves, again, was the one who said, I believe we all started from a good place. And he's kind of the one who kind of got me going down this path of thinking to myself, why is it that we're in the place that we are? And is it because people are actually nefarious or because they're negligent? I think in the case of like Title IX, making an uneven distribution where there's way more men or way more women going through education, secondary education than men are, and as a result, women are catching up in the workforce in several different areas. I don't think that's a function of leaving men behind on purpose. I think that's just a function of when you tilt the scales too far in one direction and you don't look at the repercussions. These are the repercussions. That's what's happened. So there's going to be a point here. Let's talk about another bias that you might have. One of the things, one of the first arguments that I hear whenever I have the discussion about intersexual dynamics and male-female dynamics in the country, it has to do with what's called a pay-wage gap. And so, you know, I'm sitting there reading about this and I'm like, well, the pay-wage gap, is that a real thing? And I've heard some people say it's not a real thing, and I've had other people say it absolutely is a real thing. So I did a little bit more research into that. And then I actually had a really concise explanation, again, done by Richard Reeves. He's the one, and again, the reason why I bring Richard Reeves is because I'm right of center and he's left of center. That's why I really like listening to him when it comes to some of these things. And what he determined with the pay-wage gap was the pay-wage gap ends up being what's called a child care gap. So they do a study where they look at men who they're in heterosexual relationships where their wives have children. Their wives are the primary caretakers of the child while the men go back to work. And then they look at the career trajectories of the women who stayed at home to take care of the children and the career trajectories as far as earning potential for the men who did not. And then they do the same experiment with lesbian couples, and then they look at which one of the partners in the couple actually took care of the child and stayed home, and they look at the partner that actually went out and worked. And what they found is that in the lesbian couples, the partner who went out and worked and did not stay home for parental care, maternity leave, had the exact same income trajectory as men did. So the pay-wage gap, while it is real, it is what it is it's a child caring gap. That's what it is. And so are women punished in the workforce for having children and leaving the workforce? The answer is yes, but the problem is it's a little bit more complicated than that, because if you guys have ever worked in any kind of sales job, or you worked in any kind of job that requires repetitive action, or like something like maybe coding, if you take 6 months away from being a coder, or 6 months away from being on the phones and doing remote telephone sales, there's a price to pay. Like, you aren't as sharp as you are. Just imagine if you're an NFL quarterback and you don't throw a football for 6 months. You're just going to become rusty. What I'm saying is, while there is a pay-wage gap, I don't think that this one is avoidable, ever. And so his response to this, or his result, was that there should be maternity leave, meaning men should also pay the same price, taking 6 months off for maternity leave in order to equalize their pay trajectory to those of women. Now, let's go back to what I talked about before with biases. If you're a conservative, you think the pay-wage gap is just a load of horror. If you're a liberal, you think the pay-wage gap is absolutely true, and it's based on this nefarious patriarchy. Let's go back to what I said initially. Remember we talked about the Title IX thing? Again, a lot of people who are conservative, or a lot of people who see it from a men's point of view, think that Title IX was this nefarious action perpetrated by this consortium of feminists and liberals specifically to disenfranchise men. And then the same situation here, when we're talking about a pay-wage gap, you have conservatives being like, oh, this is just made up propaganda in order for women to, play the victim, and then you have women being like, or women feminist allies saying, no, this pay-wage gap is directly because of nefarious patriarchy. So the reality of the situation is it's never that simple. There's always more to it. The answer is always more nuanced. And in order to get to the answer, the first thing you have to do is look at your own biases. What are the biases that you have particularly? Like, for instance, whenever I debate someone, one of the first things I do is I say, what if everything I believe is wrong? What if every single thing that I believe is wrong? If you guys watched that debate I did a long time ago with Destiny and Sneeko on one side and me and Rolo on the other, we did it on Fresh and Fit. When I did that, I truly think Destiny was kind of surprised by how prepared I was. And part of the reason why I was so prepared is because I started with my argument believing that every single thing that I believe, what if it was wrong? And then secondarily, I just finished the book Inner Excellence. And one of the things I did take from that book is it talks about love your opponent. And I looked at the people I was debating with a level of admiration. I even did this with flat earthers when I debated them. I tried to look at them with admiration, or at least have love or empathy for those people. And again, going back to what I said before, what if everything that I assumed was wrong? And because of that, I think I'm uniquely prepared for these debates, because I try to look at my own internal biases and my own internal weaknesses, the flaws in my argument, the holes in my argument. I really try to take the time to do so. Am I perfect? Of course I'm not perfect. Of course, like I still have internal biases. Like, I can't believe that anyone of their own volition would actually want to go to Texas A&M University, like on purpose. Like, why would you do that when you could be a Longhorn? That means you just didn't get into Texas. Like, I can't believe that people of their own volition would actually want to be Philadelphia Eagle fans. Like, to me, those people are just so incredibly try-hard and weird. You know what I'm saying? I'm a normal person. I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan. Like, who wouldn't want to be that? Of course, these are my biases. Growing up as a kid, growing up living in East Dallas. That's why I believe these things. So, I can't believe that anyone would not love to eat chicken fried steak. Even if I was a vegetarian, I would probably still want to try to have chicken fried steak like once a year. Like, these things are biases that I have, and I have to ask myself, where do they come from? And then can I examine these biases and then say, hey, can I come up with a more informed decision? And also, when you want to solve a problem, these are two different strategies. If you guys want to become very popular on YouTube, sow discord, create chaos, blame other people, play the victim. If you do some of these very, very baser, like extremely petty strategies, you can become very popular on YouTube very quickly. But if you actually want to solve a problem, which is what I try to do with my Men of Action course, with my performance coaching program. If you want to solve a problem, you have to have empathy for the other side, and you have to truly try to see things from the viewpoint of the other person. And once you understand their viewpoint, then you can have an open discussion where you don't attack one another. Like, for instance, you guys have heard me several times talk about Chris GQ Perry, Justin Baldoni, Will Hitchens, Derek Jackson. These are men that I think pander to women on social media, and they get a bunch of views because of it. And so I try to have empathy for their situation. What probably happened, maybe not for some or all of these guys, is that they were put in the friend zone by a woman, and then when they did things that were more pandering, they got a lot of approval from the women that they found attractive. And then the other thing was that the social media algorithm, being a little bit more progressive and woke, rewarded their efforts in saying, whatever belief they said about, dating a single mother, or, women can have a dream and tell that you're cheating, or men aren't shit and women are the prize, whatever, dogma that these panderers try to say. I try to have empathy for them, is to be like, oh, it seems like they were probably really hurt by women. It's really funny because a lot of people assume that content creators on my side of the aisle are all here because some woman hurt us. That's definitely not the case. In my case, especially, I can tell you that's not the case. I can tell you that's not the case with Justin Waller. I can tell you that's not the case with Adam Sosnick. I can tell you that's definitely not the case with Rollo Tomasi. I can tell you that there's several of us, that's definitely not the case. But what I see a lot of times when I see these guys who just totally pander, I believe what's probably happened is there's a lot of pain there. There's a lot of pain that's caused them to like really crave the acceptance of women in general. And if you look at Chris GQ Perry and see how many like hot girls like his stuff, he'll get like 1 million likes on a post, and the post is utter and complete like fiction. Then it makes you, then you can kind of understand, like, if the algorithm kept rewarding you for saying stuff that wasn't true, like, what would you be willing to say, right? So Another example of that would be like Graham Hancock and his nonsense about lost civilization creating the pyramids. That's just not true. I mean, it's very provably not true, but he's on Joe Rogan because of the things that he says. So because he keeps getting more publicity, going on Patrick Bet-David and Joe Rogan and selling more copies of his books, he's going to continue to say more outlandish stuff. He's being promoted. So I have to have empathy for his situation because this is probably how he feeds his family. And so that's why he says some of the nonsense that he says. And let's go even further. Like, you guys know, I've been hyper critical of Joe Dispenza because Joe Dispenza says things that are just objectively not true. I'm going to say this again for the 50th time. Joe Dispenza did not heal his spine using a quantum field. That is make-believe. That did not happen. But when you look at Joe Dispenza's audience, it's almost 80% female. And then you think about Joe Dispenza and his whole situation. He probably got into meditation and started learning things about present moment awareness that he probably, stole from Eckhart Tolle. Just being reasonable about this. I read his stuff. It's very clear he took a lot of his stuff from Eckhart Tolle. And he probably felt some amazing powers, some level of justification, some level of enlightenment from it. And then what the problem is, his own internal beliefs then led him to believe that he had a unique answer that other people didn't have. I've heard Joe Dispenza say certain things like he has certain powers that only he has and nobody else has. And then this is obviously like the type of quackery you often see when it comes to somebody who's, has cult-like beliefs. And so then you look and you see how popular his content is, and he says this stuff, and then like people like Tom Brady follow him, and you come to the realization, okay, if you were saying stuff and the more outlandish you got, the more money you made, the more you believed in yourself, the more delusions of grandeur you had, the more people followed you, then it would probably encourage you to continue that cycle to say these things and go further and further. So I try to have empathy for him and say, wow, he's probably made a ton of money from doing this, and it's probably internally rewarded him. His internal reward system has told him to continue to do it and to say things that are objectively not true in order to make money. And I try to have empathy for that situation and try to not have a problem with it. For me, one of the things I do, so I'm friends with Spencer Cornelia, and if you guys watch his channel, he makes videos about scam artists frequently. And he reached out to me a while ago, and we had a discussion. I think we went to eat one time, and then he came on my podcast. And one of the things he told me, he goes, one of the reasons why I want to come on your podcast is because I did a bunch of research on you, and I couldn't find anything that you did that was scammy. And since then, even like when I look at like say CoffeeZilla or Spencer Cornelia, I try to look at my business and I say, what is something that I'm doing that those guys would criticize me for that would come off as the slightest bit scammy? Just like a Deepak Chopra or a Joe Dispenza, where it's like I'm saying things that are objectively not true. And so because of that, what I tried to do, and this became my own bias to avoid that situation, as you guys notice, I try to include a lot more studies in my research. So for instance, a great example would be, when I talk about pre-selection, I talk about it heavily. Probably I talk about pre-selection probably more than any other coach or influencer on YouTube. The pre-selection idea, when I talk about it, I try to go back to the Royal Society, Southwest University. I believe Texas Tech did one as well, where they showed pictures to women of men with and without women, and the men that were photographed with women showing approval had found those men to be more attractive and actually to be more intelligent, to be more generous, etc. Those words, and I try to use that data in order to back up something that I had seen empirically. Another thing that I talk about frequently in my program is the idea between familiar environment and unfamiliar environment. So in an unfamiliar environment, guys get crushed by Chad. Like the better looking Chad dude is always going to do better in an unfamiliar environment. Well, it turns out Lisa Hill in 2015, she does a survey of 167 heterosexual couples, and in the survey, she asked them, how long have you guys known each other and how long have you been dating? And she looks at the delta, the difference between those two numbers, and say that's how long these people have been friends. Then she has a bunch of Confederates go and they rate the attractiveness of each one of the partners on a scale, I believe, from +3 to -3. And then they try to see how attractive the couples are, like both of them, and the correlation of attractiveness. Well, if the people have known each other for less than a month, the correlation of attractiveness was high. It was like in the 70%, like 0.72 or something like that. And after 4 or 5 months, that correlation of attractiveness dropped significantly. And then once it got to 9 months, the correlation was not, the words are exactly, the correlation was not statistically different from zero. So once you got to 9 months, then you had a guy who was like a 5 who could date a 10. Remember what I said about an unfamiliar environment, a familiar environment? Now I have data to back that up. And so that's why I'm trying to stay away from my own implicit bias, because this is stuff that I've seen firsthand. By the way, that's John Harvard right here. He's the guy who invented Harvard. And there's his statue right there. Whenever there's protests, a lot of times they'll like they'll put a bunch of stuff on that guy's statue or whatever. So going back to what we said before, what I'm trying to do, and again, I'm fully aware that I have blind spots and I'm fully aware that I get things wrong, but what I've been trying to do as much as possible is look at my own internal biases and then try to have empathy for my opponent so that I can make better arguments that are a little bit more bulletproof, that are a little bit more robust, right? I'll tell you another one. So I pretty regularly, I'm 47 years old, and I'm pretty regularly dating women under the age of 25. And I'll be honest with you, it's not that I'm going out and specifically looking for them. One girl I'm seeing right now is 29, so it's not always 25 or below, but for most of the time it is. And when I was on Fresh and Fit with Jasmine Jafar, she brought up a stat saying that like the likelihood of somebody having a 20 plus year age gap in their marriage, it was like something like 14% of the time, 19%, something like that, was the likelihood of them staying married. It was a very low percentage. Well, remember, we talk about biases. If that data is real, I want to learn about it. I don't want to just deny her because I'm a guy who dates younger women. I want to actually look into it, and I did, and it's true. It's definitely pretty difficult to do so. And it has to do with a couple of factors, one being, older men, when they're in their 40s or 50s, they have a hard time maybe chasing kids around or keeping up the level of activity, or a lot of times you have problems with obesity happening in those situations where they become less and less, able to participate in a young woman's virile, fertile life. You might have that situation. One of the things that I did was I tried to look at that data and say, okay, what if everything I believe is wrong, right? And then I admire Jasmine. I know a lot of you guys don't like her very much, but I admire Jasmine very much. I think she's very, very intelligent. And so I try to look back and say, okay, what part of this am I blind to and what part of it am I missing? And the thing that I have to say is I agree with those statistics, but I think you can make a caveat when a guy takes care of his endocrine system, takes care of his hormonal availability, meaning like it's on TRT. He doesn't become fat. He stays in the gym. He keeps a certain level of neuroplasticity. I think if you do that and you're a man who's older, I think the likelihood of you being able to make a relationship work with someone who's 20 years old, younger than you, I think is far, far, far more likely. And I'm saying this because I'm someone who's, pretty frequently, dating, girls that are 20 years younger than me, and I've been able to make it work pretty successfully on almost every occasion, right? When I say make it work, we're talking about we're together for multiple years, pretty happy. My last 3 exes, we still talk on the phone, we're friends. We still have good relationships with one another. And so that's what I would say when it comes to that, is like, what bias did I have? So my bias was, I know that I feel like I'm doing everything right, and then someone brings up some data that sort of countervenes my personal beliefs. And so do I argue with that person, or do I actually take a second to look internally and try to figure out what my biases are, all right? We as men, a lot of times when it's like, this is something I really wish a lot of guys would do. You go look at some of these programs like whatever podcast, Access Vegas, Fresh and Fit, etc. And then you see these guys in the comments and they're like, these women are they're all 304, low quality women, blah, 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 whatever these words are. And what I would really love for these guys to do, and of course they're never going to do this, is take a second internally and ask yourself, did a woman hurt me? Is that why I'm saying this? That I'm saying, like, literally, you don't know these girls. You're calling them names and you don't know who they are. Now, granted, sometimes they're open about being sex workers. I'm not talking about those women. I'm talking about, I've had 3 Miss Nevadas on Access Vegas, and you guys call them ran through hoes, and they were Miss Nevada. And it was just like highly intelligent, talented women, and you were calling them these names. And so my question is it possible that maybe you have a little bit of a bias based on somebody hurting you in your past, and that bias is causing you to call other people's names? Let me say this one more time. If you think a woman is and she won't date you, what does that say about you? That's the thing, man. I would stay away. Like, one of my new phrases that I love is, we listen and we don't judge. I'm really not big into judging people. But the only time I'm really gonna judge someone is when they don't actually look for the truth. So on these flags you see all over Harvard, It says veritas, which means truth in Latin. At the University of Texas at Austin, at the main building, when you go to the main building, it says, ye shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free. So that's what these universities, they claim, this is part of their ethos, is that they're always in search for the truth. Now, in the case of Boston, or in the case of Harvard, are they in search for the truth? I think in the most part they are, but a lot of times they aren't. A lot of times, when you come to this progressive level of wokeness, like for instance, their divinity school here is almost entirely, we saw the divinity school graduate yesterday, and almost all of the members of the divinity school had some sort of rainbow flag or LBGT affiliation. And then I go and I do some research on the divinity school here at Harvard, and it turns out they have courses like queering the congregation or queering the world. And so it seems like the divinity school here at Harvard seems to have, amongst other things, a predilection for trying to make the religious communities around the world more tolerant of LBGT communities. So again, in the divinity school, it seems like there's a bias here. Remember, we're always searching for truth, but part of a truth is that a biological man can't have a baby. That is a truth. But if you say that truth here at Harvard, you might get canceled. So that doesn't make sense. A truth might be that there actually were some anti-American sentiment that was going on here at these protests here at Harvard. That might be a truth. But you being a member at Harvard might be like, well, even though that is the truth, we shouldn't lose our federal funding. I'm not saying they shouldn't lose their federal funding. I'm saying that might be a truth or a bias that you have, a bias you had because you wear the crimson. You might actually want to just support everyone at Harvard and just think that, hey, anything that anyone outside of Harvard has to say about us is untrue and false and whatever. And the reality situation is, while I do think, I am someone who voted for Trump. I wouldn't call myself a Trump supporter. As someone who did vote for Trump, then watching this whole situation where they're taking away all of their federal funding and their ability to have foreign students come here, and now having 30% of their student population have to leave because of the fact that they can't give them student visas anymore, I do think is a bit draconian. I don't necessarily agree with that idea. At the same time, I do think Harvard does bear some responsibility. It's like, this is the way I would position the argument. You as a university have every right to say the government every single day. The government, the president, the United States of America. You have the right to say that. That's based on the First Amendment. I'm a U.S. military officer. My job was to protect and serve the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And part of that Constitution is the First Amendment, which is freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of press. And so I'm going to defend your right to say whatever you want about our government, say whatever you want about our country. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have the right to federal funds. You can tell the country to go f itself as much as you want, but that doesn't mean that you definitely have the right to federal funds. So now that's one side of the argument. The other side of the argument is this. If I question Israel's involvement in Gaza, like their military involvement in Gaza, if I just question it, that does not make me an anti-Semite. If I just question why they're there, again, you got some of my closest friends, Dan Fleischman, Adam Sosnick, I confer with these guys whenever I have these questions about what's going on with anti-Semitism. They're some of the first guys I go to. They're both Jewish men that are very prominent. And I talk to them about this whole thing, and they agree with me. It's like, just because you question the acts of Israel and Gaza does not make you an anti-Semite. And if that's what people are doing here, they don't need to have their federal funding stripped away just for that. But if they actually are, plotting sort of anti-American ideals, then there's a question that could be had. The problem is the people here at Harvard don't see it from both points of view. They only see it from the point of view as the Trump administration hates us and they're just trying to take away our power. And I'm sure people who support the Trump administration see it the opposite way. This is a bunch of anti-American liberal woke people who have no respect for the country that they live in, and they should have their federal funding removed. So my point is, I would look at this and try to find the nuance in there. And when you find the nuance, then you can find some level of negotiation or compromise. And those are the people, honestly, that take over the world. Those are the people who become the power brokers, the decision makers, those people who actually can understand their opponent, love their opponent, try to say, where are the holes in my beliefs? And when you do so, man, you can become a way more effective person. And then this is the last thing I want to talk about before I get off. Eckhart Tolle talks about this, and it's such a great thing to talk about, and it's the need to be right. I don't need to be right, bro. I don't. I understand that there's dimorphic differences between men and women, but I don't need there to be dimorphic differences. I understand that there's differences, I like, for instance, I've said this before, I think Ukraine, if they continue to have the support of NATO, they're going to, like, Russia's going to have an impossible time trying to take over the country. But I don't need that to be right. And I've gotten into huge arguments with people about that fact, just because I understand Russian and American armaments probably better than most people because I worked in counterintelligence. When I make the argument, people just really get angry about it. And then I realize, oh, they're angry because they need to be right. I don't need to be right. I don't really have a dog in the fight. I would prefer fewer people died in Ukraine than more, but I don't need to be right. When it comes up to the concept of like female selection, the idea that men are pickier or women are pickier than men, every single study I've seen shows that to be true, that men have a desire for more sexual variety than women do, and women are more picky than men are. Every single survey I've seen supports that idea, but I don't need it to be true. If it wasn't, let me tell you something, if I was a 22-year-old senior at the University of Texas at Austin and some evolutionary psychology study came out there and said women are women want just as much sexual variety as men, I'd be the happiest dude in the world. You think that I would be opposed to that? I don't need that to be right. But no, it's one of these things where, guys, you need to stop needing to be right. Understand that that truth does not need you to defend it. So let's take the example of the speed of sound and the speed of light. The speed of sound is about 760 miles an hour at sea level, and the speed of light is about 186,282 miles a second. So the speed of light is several magnitudes faster, several orders of magnitude faster than the speed of sound. If I were to have a discussion with someone and they were like, no, dude, you're a moron. The speed of sound is faster than the speed of light. Like, I could respond and say, no, I need to be right, and then call this guy a moron back, and then just get very angry about the situation. But the reality is, sound and light don't need me to defend them. They are what they are. The truth is what it is. A lot of times you guys are going to come to some very uncomfortable truths when it comes to intersexual dynamics and when it comes to concepts that you learn on some of these channels. And then you're going to feel the need to have these debates with other people. And my advice to you when it comes to this is twofold. Number one, give up the need to be right. And number two, don't lose your job because you learned some red pill. Let me and Rolo take that bullet. Let us take that bullet. Let Mac and Murphy and William Costello take that bullet. Let Dr. Buss take that bullet. Let Chris Williamson take that bullet. You don't need to take that bullet for us. We're here to do that for you. Don't lose your job, get into a fight with your family at Thanksgiving because you need to prove to them you're right. It's not worth it. I've been down this road, I'm almost 50 years old, and I'm telling you, it's not the right way to go. So anyway, hope you guys could maybe go down in the chat, go down in the comments, and put a bias that maybe you've had and you've just had your entire life. Like, I don't know, I don't really like pickles, and I don't really like the Washington Redskins. Like, there's just different things, different biases that you've had throughout your whole life. See if you can determine what those biases are. I also know, growing up in Texas and living in Las Vegas, I tend to like women with some surgical enhancements. I'm very much attracted to that, and it's something that I recognize as a bias, and I have guy friends who are not into that at all. So recognizing what your biases are, identify what they are, number one. Number two, have empathy for your opponent. Try to say, okay, where did they come up with how did they come to believe the things that they believe that are false? Number three, I would say, what if everything I believe is wrong? Okay, and then rebuild your argument from there. What if everything I believe is wrong? And number four, love your opponent. And I'm telling you, that one right there, forgive your opponent, love your opponent. There's guys out there giving terrible, terrible, terrible dating advice. And I just remember every day why I go to work. Whenever I hear their terrible dating advice telling, unattractive men to walk up to women and be themselves and show intent right off the rip, whenever I hear men give this terrible advice, I'm actually thankful to them because it reminds me why I go to work every day. Hope to see you guys in the next video.